Everybody. Nice to virtually see you. This is I think my fifth or maybe sixth of these InnovateUS uh, webinars, and I always find them really interesting because of the questions and things that come up during that time. So, if you haven't already told me in chat like uh, who you are, where you work for, where you're from. I always find that useful as we get further along. So this is my book, which just came out this year, in earlier in 2024, and it's based on a lot of the workshops I've done over any number of decades. One bonus you get for attending this workshop is a free fillable PDF of the book, um, which is now going to go in chat for you to access. And it's also available on Amazon for not very much money. I try to keep the cost as low as possible. So it's only like $10 or something, I think, for the Kindle version, and like 20 something, I think, for the paperback version. And I say that because I'm going to be covering a lot of material uh, uh, during this very short time that I have. But you can go back and look at the book. And then I'll also refer you to, at the very end, to some of the other InnovateUS workshops that I've done. So this is me. Then this is basically what I do. This is the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology from when I was in the White House. And the uh, and you'll see across right at the center of the table, hopefully you recognize President Obama. Across from him is John Holdren, and around the table, and this was in the White House, are all these different scientific and technical experts, including some Nobel Prize winners, things like that. And you'll see me, I'm at the end there in the red suit, which I did intentionally wear red that day, though I did not find this picture till any number of years after I left the White House. And the reason I like to show this is because sometimes people get, I think, somewhat cynical maybe about that their advice has impact or does not have impact. I've been working in science technology policy, for decades, and I can name any number of impacts that the work that I have done through policy analysis has impacted people's lives. And I think that, to me, is always what we want to think about, is that ultimately our goal is to impact society, for the better good. And the best the best way to do that is looking at the evidence, looking at studies, and analyzing them, rather than just doing things like, oh, well, that sounds good to me, which can definitely also occur. So I thought I would start as an example of this because I've been thinking a lot about flooding. I have for a number of years because of studies that I've worked on, initially like in West Virginia, but now in other places. And so I like, prior to these workshops, to go to Google News and just, say like, type in the topic. And so I just did this, I guess yesterday, to see what happens. And so this is an example of challenges that can all of a sudden occur, where you might need to do some policy analysis to figure out what to do about the situation. So, for example, here, of course, I'm sure everybody knows about the flooding that's in um, Western North Carolina. And here we have flooded private wells. There's like uninsured homes. Then here's some analysis that somebody did trying to figure out where flood policy would help the most. And these are just all examples of things where you in a public policy role of any kind might need to figure out what to do and try to figure out relatively quickly. And that's sort of the nature, I think, of public policy. It's not very often that we have time to really think about something for a long period of time. Everything always seems to be, pretty urgent. So I'm going to talk a little bit about flooding, and the reason why I'm doing that is because I want you to think about it in your community, as because I want you to kind of think about, here's a challenge, a problem, where I might have to do some sort of policy analysis, because flooding is something that occurs everywhere, and it's something that's likely to occur, as you'll see from some of the slides that I'm going to show you, um, and throughout the United States and of course the world. But for me, it's like a personal irritation that too often, just like I saw in the news this morning, the focus when they talk about flooding is right along the coastline. And the reality is flooding is everywhere. And so I really appreciate uh, these uh, these graphics, which are from an organization called Climate Central, which focuses on making the connection between scientists and engineers and communicators to develop things that can be used by the public. So because of climate change, we're going to get more inland flooding, and that's because we're going to have more intense rainfalls. There's going to be drier soils and less snow, earlier melt. All these things are going to lead to changes. Uh, just as an example, like this is like, I don't know, quite a while ago, maybe 10 years ago. I'm based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we had major flooding here, enough that I like got stuck between two um, major flood areas, right? So in other words, it wasn't that I was trying to be between these two flash flood things, but I just kind of like got stuck. And so I finally was able to figure out a way out. That was, Pittsburgh, we get lots of rain, things like that, but usually not that bad. I then went to visit my uncle who lived in Tucson, Arizona. You think, oh, desert, no problem, right? No, same thing happened to me just like a week later when I was in Tucson, where I got stuck between two major rain events, right? And that was a decade ago, and it's just only going to get worse. And you can see that in this graphic, which sort of shows the projected change. And you'll notice it's not just on the coast, it's like all over the country. It's areas where we consider to be relatively desert areas. Um, Here again, we see the changes in different parts of the country. So a lot of people, when they think about climate change, they think about heat, and they forget about this concept of, or maybe they never knew, about extreme precipitation. And this can cost a lot of money, right? And this is just what we know as of today, right? So this is like looking at the past. This is looks like 2022 that this analysis was done, and it's just going to increase in the future. And again, you see it's all over the United States. And of course, we have to worry about heat as well. But I think heat is obvious with climate change. I think flooding and extreme rain conditions are less obvious to people. So I also brought up this thing of North Carolina, and you can see here that, of course, they're along the coast, the beautiful coastline here, and you can see these higher, the darker red being these intense rain conditions. But over here in Western North Carolina, you can also see where there was expectations, where there have been flood loss, and there's will be future flood loss. But definitely, in just watching the news, you'll see that they were not prepared. Things had happened that had never happened before. And that makes it definitely challenging in terms of taking action. So here's a little exercise that I would like you to do. So like I said, I'm based in Pittsburgh, and there's a website which is called firststreet.org, and you can type in any address or zip code and see your flood risk. So in this case, I typed in 15222, which is downtown Pittsburgh. And then you'll say here, it says that it has an extreme risk of flooding over the next 30 years. There's about 2,000 properties that have risk, and it's 98.7% of all the properties in this downtown Pittsburgh area. Now, say that I myself, who live in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, I looked at my risk and it was just like 1%. But what we also know from the data, I mean, I was like number one as opposed to on the scale of it. But we also know that it's the poor communities that are most likely to be hit by these flood conditions. And we've seen this over and over again. And so it's really important to have an understanding of it. And this is like the map that this website generates. And, Pittsburgh is pretty famous for its like three rivers, which you sort of see here in the center. But what's interesting to me is that, of course, there is flooding along the river, but look how far flooding is away from the actual river themselves, right? And so it's no different than when we talk about the impact of flooding in Florida. It's not just going to be there, but a lot of the news coverage focuses on Florida, and what that can mean is people are less prepared. So please take a moment. Hopefully the link went into chat there. Yep. Uh, yep. Yes. Yeah. So making. Okay, great. Yeah. So firststreet.org. That is this tool that you can use. Like I said, you can put in your home address first, but then you might want to put in another address. And then if you could also, while we're on this topic, go ahead and put in the link for my book so that everybody can get a copy of that when they get a chance. So these things are very well known. These are just from the National Flood Insurance Program that since 1996, 99% of these counties have been impacted by flooding, but only 4% have flood insurance. Already over 40% of the claims come from outside high-risk flood areas, and that policymakers have an average claim of 68,000, which doesn't be repaid. But I will tell you, when you look at some of that destruction that's in North Carolina, 68,000, or I think the maximum is like 200 something thousand, is not going to be even close to helping these families recover from that flooding. And again, many people don't even have flood insurance at all. So this is something that you, on the policy side, might have to deal with. And you might think, oh, that's just like the first responder kinds of people that do this kind of thing. But I asked my friend ChatGPT, I said, how does it flooding impact state and local government services? And of course, you have the obvious, which is the emergency response activities. But then these other things that, I'm sure you're sort of seeing on the news, damaged infrastructure. So if you work in transportation or utilities, public buildings, so, things like police stations, fire stations, how are those going to be managed? This then puts an increased strain on the financial resources of the communities that are impacted. Plus, there's going to be an awful lot of lost revenue because those businesses aren't working. Then, of course, you have the long-term recovery. So, it can take, like we know from what we've seen from past hurricanes, it can take a decade to try to rebuild housing, community development, to develop resilience plans, to prepare for that. So if like, what's happening this week, yet another hurricane is hitting an area that's already dry.
I'm watching it.
Yeah. The then, you have disruption to public services like
You watching?
schools, health and social services. Let me do that. Then somebody has to coordinate with the federal and state governments. Then you have the impact that's on these vulnerable populations where they're doing things. And this is just a small, list, I'm sure, of all the different impacts that occur when there's a flooding event. So I'm going to pause here for a second. And what I'd like you to do is think about, again, in our example, how, like, relative to what you do in public government and a public role, how might, like, you be asked to respond to a flooding event or some other event that, where you're kind of to, like, quickly kind of have to figure out what sort of policies and things that you're going to do. So if everybody could take a moment to think about that and then put it into chat. Okay.
Right.
So the person's asked me to put in the chat, so I'm going to put it in here, which is, how might you be asked in your role in government to respond to a flooding event or something similar?
We have two answers already, Deborah. I don't know if you want me to go for that or wait a little more. Okay.
No, let's wait a little bit
Okay.
longer.
Okay.
Yeah, so I see here, kind of knowing what resources are available, that'd be good. That you have planning and simulation workshops between events, that's good too. Anybody else? Okay, update the public when they call in. Good. Because everybody wants to kind of know what's going on. Okay, let's get a couple more. I know there's, let me see, 40 of you out there. There's got to be a few more responses. Information on road access. Good. Okay, yeah, coordination with other agencies, yes. Yeah, because it takes a village to help respond to a village. Looking at the impacts, assessing impacts on publicly owned facilities in the flooded areas. Yes, particularly since a lot of those will need to provide services. Resources for relief of lost wages, coordinating regionally to provide information on food and clean water centers. Okay, great. Okay, great. These are a good list of answers and still continue to put some in. So the question is, how do you decide what to do, right? There's so much that needs to be done. And the challenge with these kind of emergencies is it's not like you have like it that easy of a life either, right? So you have your own family, your own issues that might make it challenging for you to, like, if the road is disappeared and things like that. So you want to try to you're gonna have to try to think about, like, a way to logically prioritize and decide what makes sense. And when there's limited resources, limited people, all these different things. And this is where policy analysis comes in. So what I'd like you to do at this point is to pick a societal challenge in your community. It could be related to flooding, but it could also be related to something else, some other societal challenge that your community has. And you're going to use this as sort of a thought exercise as we go through each step of the policy analysis process. So I'm going to give you another, like, a minute here to sort of think about what societal challenge, and it can be anything. Like I said, it doesn't have to be flooding. I just wanted to start with that to kind of get your juices flowing. But, what is a challenge that your community faces where you, as somebody who works in policy, or maybe you're not in policy yet, but you want to work in policy, what are the challenges that you are facing? Okay. So there's good training, certifications, probably with emergency, how to encourage and educate communities on the risks of building homes in flood zones, affordable housing, homelessness. Yeah. Now let's try to get a few more. There's got to be some, like the world is not a perfect place. So there's got to be some societal challenge out there in your community that, people are concerned about. Ensuring continuity of services. Yes, that's good. Solid waste management. When flooding occurs in a city street, it's not always easy to determine who caused the flooding after you tear up the street to fix it. Yes, I have faced that problem myself at one point. Limited resources distributed equitably while maintaining compliance. Yes, that's another challenge. Balancing accountability and tracking of government resources versus flexibility and speed for responders on the ground. Respect of privacy once impacted, unwanted photos, media taken stress, enforcing privacy compliance. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so these are all really good examples of these things. And you might think, oh, these are little small things. But, with policy analysis, you can't be something too big. You really have to focus on something small. So here's another good one. Improving reach and affordability of mobile broadband and internet for everyone. Okay, so these are the 10 steps, and again, you'll see this in my book, and we're going to go through each one of these, so I'm not going to go through them now, but you'll see here that the first one is describe and set a problem, and in the end, you're going to do this various analysis steps to communicate the results of your analysis. So I can only do so much in explaining each of these things as we go along. So I encourage you, if you say, oh, I'd really like to know more about this topic. Luckily, I've done some other webinars and I have a future one coming up. And those are like another whole hour just on, like looking at effectiveness and efficiency, for example, that you can look at as to how to do things. So the first aspect is describing the setup problem. And you might think that's easy, but I think you just realized, hopefully you've realized as you have come up with these topics, that you have so far, is it's sometimes not easy to do, right? And then you also have jurisdiction issues, like you don't have control over everything. You only have control over your area. So the first thing is focusing on what societal problem are you trying to solve? So somebody mentioned, for example, like internet access, which is a really good one because like I just saw this other day, people said, oh, if you're in North Carolina and you need to know where to go to help, go to like the internet. And of course, they don't have any internet because they don't have power, they don't have water and all these other kinds of things. So that is something where, people sort of need it, but you're also going to have to think about where it's needed, right? It's not for everybody in the whole community. It's going to be in in certain areas. And so you're going to have to, as somebody I think mentioned, triage, do something like that. So you want to look at what, how you're going to make things better for people, looking at the root causes of those problems and possible solutions, and where sort of analysis, might play a role. So with internet access, for example, what is it that, if we're going to have to triage, how are we going to figure out what places need this internet access the most? And also thinking about ahead of time, how can we prepare for those areas where internet access might be an issue? The other thing is to think about geography. So, what works here in Pittsburgh is not necessarily going to work in Arizona. There's some things which are different geographically, in terms of like here we have kind of like hills and mountains and stuff versus flatland. But there's also things related to culture and what's considered acceptable and not acceptable. These are all things that we have to think about. And then you also need to think about who your policymaker is. So in some cases, there's going to be jurisdictional issues where, the person who is like the mayor has certain issues, the person who is the governor has certain things that they can manage. And so you really want to think about who it is you're going to focus on. And even that's true even within your own organization, because sometimes things are going to go higher up in the ladder and sometimes they're going to go elsewhere. And if nothing else, you're going to have to like bring people together. So this is an example. This is from a food insecurity topic, because I sort of felt that was something that also is something that's a challenge. So in this case, in looking at what sort of problem you're trying to solve, I'm focused here on households with children headed by a single woman because they have the highest rate of food insecurity. And you'll see here after each of these things is a citation, a little footnote there. And that's because all of these are not based on my opinion, but they're based on information I found through the academic literature or white papers or government reports, things like that. Then we're looking at, say, the root causes, such as like race and education, incarceration, family income, possible solutions. These are things that came from other reports, like looking at empowering all consumers to make and have access to healthy choices. Analysis can play a role by assessing equity within the various federal nutrition assistance programs, focusing on the United States. The policymaker in this case is the administrator of the USDA, Food and Nutrition Service. And if there's any sort of upcoming policy deadlines, in this case, we have the Farm Bill reauthorization. So the second aspect is to develop what I call the what actions, if any, question. And this is, really important. It's probably like like I work with all sorts of people from high school students on to very senior government officials when I teach this. And this is actually the hardest step that they have. And that is thinking about focusing the questions. So based on what you figured out in that first step, you want to figure out who the policymaker is that can take action and really make sure you focus on the societal problem and then again, focus on the geographic region. So for example, here are examples of good and bad questions. So a good question would be like, and this is, by the way, based on a trip I took to Canada back when to look at the oil sands that they have up there. So it's like, what actions, if any, should Alberta's Minister of Environment and Sustainable Resources and Development take to respond to concerns that energy companies are not taking sufficient action to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from oil sands in Alberta. And the reason why this question has to be so specific is that, of course, there's lots of different sources of greenhouse gas emissions, like it could be motor vehicles, for example. You know, it could be things that are, you know, like stationary sources, you know, like power plants. But I'm focusing on just this aspect, greenhouse gas emissions from the oil sands that are in this. Alberta is kind of like a state in Canada. So here's an example of a bad question, which is looking at what actions, if any, should be taken by NOAA to encourage fisheries to reduce wasted catch. Okay, so when you look at that question, what is wrong with it? There's like 4 or 5 things wrong with it. Right, too broad in terms of policymaker focus, that's correct. The scope is too big. Right, so give some more specifics there. Does NOVA oversee fisheries? Yes, correct. Okay, so you're doing very good. There's like one more. There's only like 1 or 2 more, but there's only one more that I'm really looking for. Goal is subjective, bit of a loaded question. Ah, there we go. Wasted catch is unclear. Okay, so what is wasted catch to me might not be wasted catch to you, right? Definitions are super important in public policy. So here's an example of, like, if I was writing this question, and again, this is based on real stuff, which is what actions, if any, should the Assistant Administrator for Fisheries at NOAA take to respond to concerns that an excessive number of sea turtles die because they are caught in shrimping nets in U.S. ocean fisheries? Okay, so you can see the level of specificity here, but without getting too long, okay? So the reason it says what actions, if any, is because we should not presume that there will be an action. In most cases, there is no action. That's the status quo, is that we're just going to stay with our current policy, and there always is a policy, even if there is a policy that we're not going to take action. So we don't want to, so in order to be neutral, we want to have that if any in there. And then, of course, NOAA is the big agency. So you really can't just say, okay, NOAA. You have to drill down to the person who's really in charge, the person, you know, they might not have the ability to maybe make that decision, but they will certainly be the one who will propose that decision. And then you want to focus on something that is measurable, and thinking about, like, how do you know if you have impact, right? So this is, so we're responding to concerns that excessive number of sea turtles die, right? So the public is the one who has brought up the issue about sea turtles, but we're not, again, saying that it is an excessive number, but because we have the concerns in there, we're saying this is relative to what the public is concerned about. That they're saying, hey, these sea turtles are dying, it's too many, because they're caught in these shrimping nets in these U.S. ocean fisheries. And what we have to do is figure out, is that true or is that not true? And what is excessive and what is not excessive? And so that is why we have these sort of careful phrases in there, like if any, concerns, because that's ultimately our goal. So I will stop here just to make sure that everybody sort of understands this question concept, because it's usually one of the most challenging things for people to do. Okay, well, we'll continue to move on. You can always ask questions later. So this is the question that I put together for our food insecurity question, which are what actions, if any, should the administrator at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Food and Nutrition Service take to respond to equity concerns about federal nutrition assistance programs, particularly for households with children headed by a single woman that have the highest rate of food insecurity in the United States. So now that we have our question, the next step is to identify options. So one option is always a status quo, which is basically no action. And again, that is the most common reality, is that no action is taken. I think a mistake a lot of people make is assuming that there will be action when it's actually sort of the opposite. Now, there's all sorts of different policy mechanisms. So this is sort of just kind of like a list of ideas and examples of what they might be, because a lot of people just only think of the first two, like taxes and regulation. But some of these you have already identified, things like subsidies and grants, services, information, private rights structuring, education, consultation, financing, contracting, bureaucratic and political reforms. Yeah. So your next step is to go ahead and just like pick one of these that you think might be worth it. You don't have to put the actual option, you can just put the category of option, whatever it is that makes sense for the question that you developed. Yeah, so I put that question in chat. Let's see. Is status quo the example column? No. So status quo would be like your existing policy. So in the example of the food insecurity, the status quo would be the WIC program. Again, that's Women and Infants and Children program, whose goal is to help people who are food insecure, that are a certain portion of the population. The WIC program itself has been shown to work in sort of helping these families, but the challenge is that 40% of the people who are eligible for the program do not apply. Okay, so that is sort of the status quo, and so we can keep the program as it is, and just realize that for whatever reason, 40% of the people are not going to participate, or we could come up with a new policy to try to encourage that 40% to participate in the WIC program, because it's been shown to be effective. And from a societal standpoint, it overall reduces cost, related to healthcare, education, the ultimate economic success of families. So I hope, Meredith, that answered your question. Okay, so yeah, make a requirement to report activity. Yes, that is a perfectly fine policy option. Subsidies and grants for individuals to get internet to the home and our mobile phones and mobile subscriptions. Yes, that's a good one, Alice. So start this is a good list, I think, to kind of brainstorm. What you want to do when you develop policy options is you want to develop as many ideas as you possibly can and then cut back. So it's a really great thing to do around a table where lots of people are generating ideas. So yeah, grants to offices that manage WIC enrollment for local outreach campaigns. Yes, that is a good option too, Ruth. Okay. Then Alice also has financing and contracting with internet providers, like what's done with the universal service funds that fund telecoms to rural regions that aren't profitable for telcos. Yes, those are all good examples. Okay, so here is like sort of a more, there's like sort of the full sort of set of questions here, which is talking about the different again, the problem that we're trying to solve, the root causes, and then thinking about possible solutions. And so what we're doing here on the possible solutions and try to come up with ideas is we're looking at the barriers. And again, these barriers are based on the academic literature where people have studied these. And some of these barriers that we're trying to like overcome with our policies are misconceptions about eligibility, transportation, and cost to reach the WIC clinics, language and clinical barriers, negative clinical experiences, such as long wait times and poor customer service, applying for services that require, to do that requires time away from work, which risks job loss and lost wages, discontent with the children's food packages and limited foods that are allowable for WIC. So these are some of the barriers that we know about. And then here we're looking at like different policies and so forth where laws could be passed to respond to that change. So based on that, for this example, I came up with two, which is the first one is that WIC clinics should be required to offer services over the phone and video and allow remote benefit issuance. This is something that happened during the pandemic, but it stopped in some states after it. So it's a state decision whether or not to do this or not. And the second thing is to provide transportation vouchers to assist the clients. So you saw out of all the problems that I listed from the literature, I decided to go for these two. It may or may not be the best ones, but it seemed to me based on my review of the literature out there that it was what made the most sense. Oops, sorry, I'm trying to get this in here. Oop. There we go. Okay, so now we have our options, and then this is what I call the 4 E's. I didn't really make up the 4 E's. They are based on like academic stuff that I learned in PhD school. But over time, teaching many folks about this, I found it's easiest to kind of focus on these like 4 E's. And we're going to just go through each one of these. So the first is effectiveness. And effectiveness is the degree to which the societal goal is more likely to be met by implementing the policy. So this is what most people focus on. They focus on effectiveness, but that's not enough to make a decision. I think those of you who are in government roles probably understand this because everything costs and we only have so much money. So that comes to efficiency. And with an efficiency, what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out what gets the best bang for the societal buck. So something might be super effective, but it also might be super expensive, and we just don't have those resources. So we have to kind of look at efficiency to figure out, what makes the most sense. The next thing is equity. Equity is looking at the fairness of the policy. There's always winners and always losers for each policy. So when we're talking about internet stuff, for example, if we say, okay, we're going to put our say, trailers that provide internet service here in this neighborhood, and we only have 10 trailers and there's like 30 neighborhoods, then the other 20 neighborhoods might get mad at us, right? So we need to understand who the winners are, who the losers are, and the reasoning for which we made these decisions needs to be clear. And then we have ease of acceptability. And ease of acceptability is not like what politicians think, but it's more what the degree to which a policy is opposed or supported by the key stakeholders. Because if there's sufficient opposition, then it's unlikely for a policy to move forward. Or if there's insufficient support, it's also maybe not likely to move forward because there's just like so many priorities. You know, people don't say, hey, you know, we really need this service, this internet service, then they are not going to provide it, right? Because, you know, there's only so much money, so much resources to go around. So what we do, and again, this is where these in-depth videos are going to help you in terms of figuring out how to do these things, is we're going to do what seems a simple pro-con analysis, but I emphasize that this pro-con analysis is based on real literature, real studies. It's not, again, just things off the top of my head. So for example, in this case, we found that option one, which is the digital application, increases participation by 8%, but the transportation is 4 to 10%. And then we have to look at the cons. So the digital benefits might not work in rural areas that have limited internet access. And the transportation was less cited as a concern. And then we put a sort of a summary analysis here just to basically make an assessment that based on our judgment as analysts and the data that we have, are the pros greater than the cons? Are the cons greater than the pros? Or are they about the same? So in this case, I made an assessment that the cons are greater than the pros. So I have a minus. And then on effectiveness, the pros are greater than the cons. And also the same thing is true for the other option, the transportation voucher. But then the next thing we look at is efficiency. So we're kind of looking at the cost. And again, we're looking at sort of the benefits. And you'll see there's a number of studies here that talk about the financial benefits for these activities. Then we have the cost. And then we also think about non-monetary considerations. So the impact of like not having support and having it might be things related to cognitive development and regular medical care and a reduction in fetal deaths and infant mortality, all because of the support from the SWIC program. So we're able to calculate the benefit and the cost. And I know it seems weird that it's 14 million for the benefit, but this is based on like what that data says. But you'll see that the transportation voucher cost quite a bit more than the digital application. And so when we look at the efficiency measure, we'll see that that the digital application of benefits are the strongest. The transportation is not as strong based on that information that we looked at. And even still here, when we look at the actual status quo, the current program, the cons are greater than the pros, again, based on financial information, because it increases Medicare cost. So the next aspect we're looking at is equity. And when we look at equity, we're looking at the first, the groups who are affected by the policy, the impact of the policy on each of these different groups, the perceptions of the policy, and the impact on existing disparity. And so we're looking at this for each of our different options. And then again, based on that, we sort of look at the status in terms of, again, who are the winners, who are the losers for these different policies, and we make our assessment. And then lastly, the last of for ease of political acceptability. Here we're trying to look at like who is likely to support, oppose, what's going to happen in terms of the key stakeholders. And this is where, and this is not uncommon, the status quo sort of wins. Like it's a lot easier for people not to do anything. Anytime you take action in the policy world, you're taking a risk. And in this case, there are certainly, again, this is a national policy. Some conservative states are unlikely to necessarily want to participate in this policy. They already have taken action that they're not going to participate in, say, school lunch programs and other kind of programs. So you already know that there's some states, based on their past history, that are unlikely to be happy with a policy that requires them to do something. There's the digital option, which is more likely to be positive. The transportation voucher are not necessarily going to make things easier for people, for those policymakers who oppose making it easier to get benefits. There's something here which is called Prince analysis, and so this is the probabilities that you'll see here. I don't have time to cover them today, but they are described in the book. So you put all these analysis together and looking at them. Okay, so again, put this in chat. Which of these options would you pick if you were the policy maker? Just put the option in the chat. Okay, yes, correct. I'm seeing a lot of option ones, yes, because that's the one that, like, looking at these 4 E's is most likely to occur. So here is, where you make the decision as to what to recommend based on your analysis. This is sort of just a summary and that kind of goes through each of the different aspects of it. So you can imagine you might be writing a memo or something, and this would be the core of your memo because you're writing about these 4 E's and explaining why you picked this option over other options, and to show that you've made this sort of thoughtful analysis. And then the last step here is to communicate the results of your analysis. And so what I'd like people to do here is, this is our original question up here. And then we have this kind of 30-second version of a policy pitch. And a policy pitch is when you go in and you talk to a policymaker or your boss or whoever, and you say, okay, well, what do you think? Why should you do this? And when you do this, it's kind of got several parts to it. So the first thing is you start out what's called bottom line up first. And in this case, basically saying that USDA should require that there be digital methods, because in-person requirements, this can be lost wages, childcare, transportation cost. It's good to put a story in there. So in this case, and this is a made-up story, but you would want it to be a real-world story because that's what people remember. And so you have here Mary, a single mother of 3 young children, doesn't have enough money for food, yet she is expected to apply and get her benefits in person. And of course, anybody who has kids would immediately understand that issue, or knows relatives who have kids, or whatever it might be. And then you talk about the benefit. If a digital option was a nationwide requirement, then WIC participation rates would increase. Not only will we have less hunger, but society would save money because better nutrition leads to lower Medicaid cost. Okay. And so that is our sort of summary of our evidence-based analysis based on our 4 E's. So there's lots of different ways you can communicate this message. There's policy reports, big, long things. It might be, say, 100, 200 pages. Policy briefs, which tend to be somewhere between one, my preferred policy brief is one double-sided page. Policy memo, and those are meant to be external. Policy memos are internal, where you're maybe doing this analysis for your boss. Explainers are just explaining like why should we be worried about flooding in our community? That would be an example of an explainer. Social media posts like, hey, are you prepared for this flood that's coming up? Videos that kind of, where you can really kind of show some motion. Infographics, which were really hot for a while. They've kind of fallen out of fashion, I think, a bit more. And then policy position articles. And those are things where you really have the time to do profiles and things of that nature. And so you can really like publish it in something might be, like, I don't know, Pittsburgh Magazine or Texas Monthly or places like that. Okay, so I'd like to end here. I'd like to use ChatGPT to come up with a sonnet for sort of the themes of my talks. And this one is after much deliberation, I picked the title Analysis, the Policy Lifesaver, from the options ChatGPT gave me. So at policy's core, analysis must stand, a guiding light through which clear truth is shown. With measured thought, we sift through what's at hand to craft each word and claim on reason's throne. No rhetoric or passion can sustain the weight of facts when they are left unbound, but through keen study, clarity we gain, and in that depth, the strongest voice is found. For policy, when rooted in thought, can navigate the most uncertain seas. It holds a line when chaos would be wrought and shapes the path where future minds agree. A solid base of logic ever true makes policy a beacon we pursue. So if you liked ChatGPT's sonnet, please let me know. I'm a big fan of its sonnets. Okay, and I'm just going to go through these last couple of slides before we go to questions. These are past workshops that I have done. And when you get the slide, all of these are clickable, so you can go to them. So like I said, each one of these things, like benefit cost analysis, is a whole nother thing. And believe me, even benefit cost analysis, I took that for like a whole semester in PhD school, right? So these are my like mini Cliff Notes versions of these things. And then I have this workshop that is coming up in December. So if you'd like to know more about equity analysis, please sign up for it. And then here are things that if you'd like to sort of like, get continuing education at no cost that you can do. So this is my webpage. This is the my LinkedIn page if you want to sort of follow me. So I do like little brief things about once a week about Policy Analysis 101. I also have 2 LinkedIn newsletters you can get for free. This one is sort of like my opinion on certain thing. Like in this case, part of the reason I'm flooding is that I have here insufficient S&T policy for climate-related inland flooding. So that was my column that I did last week. And then also here's something about S&T policy job openings. And as I mentioned, hopefully we can put the link in one more time. You can get a free downloadable PDF fillable of my book that you're welcome to get for attending this activity. And then also there is a link when you get the slides. It's also linked earlier in the presentation. So that is all for today.